Hello and welcome to Bloke on the Range. Now, here at Bloke on the Range we make no great claims of originality. So here is a Patreon Q&A with questions asked by certain patrons. Now, I should be able to get to all of them today, which was very nice. First of all, thank you to all our patrons at whatever level for helping to make the channel possible. It is enormously appreciated. Thank you very, very much. So, in order in which they arrived, first up, Kevin asks, do you reload for the 1889, use GP90, or are safe commercial loads easily available in Switzerland? If you do reload, what kind of loads do you make? Well, there's no commercial loads for GP90 available. It's really only weirdos like us that actually shoot the old rifles. And then if you just rocked up to a normal 300 meter range, they wouldn't let you on it with it because it's not GP11. The original GP90, it's all more than 100 years old. When it does turn up, you can normally get it for about a franc, which is about $1 at the moment, around. Some of it's click bang, the rest of it is click. So it's fine for demonstrations. Occasionally we remanufacture it into new cases for demonstrating for videos, but it's basically is a no-go for actually shooting it. So we reload. And I've pretty much tried the full range of loads and had mixed results. Effectively, the difficulty is that really long, cavernous throat is a bit of a pain. I've got a couple of people who've promised me moulds for the original profile bullet as close as you can possibly make it without the iron cap on it. None of them have appeared yet, so if you're watching, please can I have the moulds? Anyway, loads that I have done, I've done basic sort of 1600 feet per second cast bullet loads, 160 odd grain bullet with both Lee and Lyman bullets. That works fine. We're sort of talking 16 grains of Vitavury and 110 or equivalent. They work fine. The fast pistol powder loads, they work fine. Short range, obviously. Stuff that should work at 300 meters. I've shot 175 grain Privy FMJs with 35.5 grains of Reload Swiss 40, which was an attempt to get sort of vaguely close to the original ballistics, even if it's a bit light. Mixed results. It has worked sometimes, it hasn't worked other times. And I've been trying to load with 200 grain H&N copper plated plastic coated, and they haven't worked very well at all. And the bullet's not produced anymore, but a gunsmith about an hour from here has a stock of it. I thought I'll try it. It's about the right weight bullet, and even at 50 meters it's already making slightly elongated holes, so that bullet is basically a no-go. Effectively what I think is going on there is that it's a ball rider type design, so the nose is quite narrow, the idea being that it'll ride on the rifling. Which is all good and well if the rifling starts right in front of the chamber and not miles forward. So I think they're going into the rifling at an angle, and it doesn't get any better when they come out the other end. So what I'm going to do is, when I've got these molds finally, I will try and get something as close as possible to the original load and report back. Next up, Conrad asks, firstly, Messrs. Chap and Bloke, very well done. Keep up the good work, and I'm delighted to see someone giving the Americans a run for their money. Well, thank you very, very much. Secondly, can you or should you zero sights on a pistol? Is there any point outside target shooting for doing so in a military or police context? Lastly, really looking forward to seeing what you do with the pistol manual, Fairburn et al. Any ideas when you'll be getting to it? I shall possess my soul in patience. I think the answer to the question is yes. The other question is how zeroed is the next thing. What you basically don't want to end up doing is aiming off at a range you're likely to use the pistols at. Now, we shoot all sorts of historic pistols which are horrifically sighted at varying distances. And for instance, if that's your aiming mark, at 25 meters, you might be aiming down there. At 15, you might be aiming there. At 10, there. And it's a bit of a pain because you've got to think about what you're doing and often aim on a diagonal line depending on where you are in relation to the target. Now, I would suggest in a police or military context, if you're sights are so far off that you have to think about it, then they're off. If you're thinking in a sort of self-defense situation, as far as I have a right to have an opinion on this, if you're talking the 21-foot rule, if they're so off that you're having to think about it at 21 feet, then you need to fix them. But if they're, let's say, if they're at 25 yards or so, if they're 4 inches off at 21 feet, it's close enough for government work. I wouldn't worry about it. There's basically, if you're going to have to think about it, you need to move them. Seeing what we're going to do with the pistol manual, no idea when we'll be getting to it, because it's something we need to do on a private range we've got to ourselves, because we need to be able to go up to the targets to shoot the old-fashioned point shooting from in front of the body rather than aiming. It's just a question of time and range availability, but we will get around to it. We will get around to it. It's just a question of when. Hopefully this year. Next up, Michael asks, I'm curious about your reloading practices. What kind of equipment and supplies are available in Switzerland? Do you get any American powders? I read a lot less than I used to. It's just largely a time issue, and I'm shooting less than I used to, so not as much. I used to reload on a Hornady lock and load progressive, which was fine for the first 10,000 rounds, and then the timing was shot, and then it became such a hassle and a stress to work with it that I ditched it and went back to a single stage, which is fine if you're only loading 50 or 100 at a go. Equipment supplies, we can get the full range. It's a question of how much you want to pay for it. You can order stuff directly from Brownells, and it comes via the local branch of Brownells. There's a couple of shops that sell reloading equipment, but you're paying Swiss shop prices. There's quite a massive markup on it. Reloading's not that popular here, basically, because the vast majority of shooting is based around the official 300-meter program for rifle, or it's small bore, or it's 9mm at 25 meters or 50 meters, and there's not really a lot of point. There's no economic advantage to doing it. The IPSC crowd, they reload a lot more because they're getting through larger volumes of ammunition. The real way to make it economic here is to cast your own, which I do, or at least I did. I haven't had time. I've got the casting bench set up on the balcony, but I've not actually had a chance to use it yet. I really need to, because I need some more of those 200 grain fat 38s for 380-200. American powders, occasionally. New production, it ends up being kind of expensive, because, for instance, I bought a pound of Bullseye and it cost me like $70, and a pound of Unique cost me about $70. There's a shop that has some old stock of Accurate arms, so I bought quite a lot of that. That's a much more reasonable price, about $40 a pound, but once that's gone, that's gone. I haven't found an importer for Lovex, which is the Eastern European made equivalent of Accurate. And occasionally you can find French powders. It was also the same problem in Holland, really. It was a question of always having access to the same powder. It wasn't necessarily a given. So I've got a book with all manner of different loads, and I'm quite used to interpolating load data these days, because you don't always have load data for exactly what you want to do. Yeah, so about the only powder that we can consistently get is Reload Swiss, which is cut tubular, and everything from fast revolver powders up to 50 BMG. Kind of expensive. It's about $100 to $110 a kilo. Right, Stuart asks, are you able to test some submachine guns? Don't know if Swiss law allows you to have them. Yes, Swiss law does allow us to have them. Canton Bern is relatively liberal, and I'm debating whether I'm going to pluck up the courage to request a permit for them. It's an exemption permit. You need another exemption permit to shoot them. It's a bit of a touchy subject, because it's there in the law that you can have them if the cantonal police gives you the permit. It's sort of an open secret, and we'd rather not film using them. If I get one, I'll film using it dry at the bench, but I think it would not be popular if I actually made a video of shooting it, so I'm afraid no. Right, Stephen asks, thanks for the wonderful vids. Thank you for watching them. Several weeks ago you made a passing comment on Car 98K acceptance accuracy standards implying that they were not very stringent. Could you elaborate on this a bit? Let's just hope all the wearaboos have switched off by now. Right, I'm actually going to do a video on this when I've plucked up the courage. They're not very stringent at all. So, to elaborate on this, there's a two-part test. It's the same shooting, but what they did was they fired 5 rounds at an aiming mark, which has a vertical box on it, which is 140 millimeters high by 70 millimeters wide. In fact, there's 2. There's one 3 centimeters up from the other. One's for steel-cased shooting in ammunition, and one's for brass-cased, because they had different expected point of aims. Why they didn't just load them to the same point of aim, I don't know, but they did. So the first part of the test is that 3 of the 5 shots have to be in that box. And that is actually to test the sighting. Now, Steve Law's books are very interesting on this. He goes into this in great detail. And the Germans went to great lengths to mechanically zero the rifles. So during the manufacturing process, there was something like 6 occasions when the barrel, whether it was a blank sort of pre-rifling, post-rifling, once it had been profiled, there were 6 occasions where it was manually, visually straightened. The idea being that when the rifle's assembled, they can set the sights with a set of gauges. And then they've got a gauge that goes in the breech and sits in the V-notch. And you've got a gauge that sits in the muzzle and sits on the front sight. And if this gauge is saying that it's in the middle, it should shoot into this box, or at least 3 of the 5 shots into this box. For instance, section of number 4, they realised that actually only the last 6 inches of a barrel needed to be straight, so they do it right at the end with a plug gauge, and if the plug gauge went in 6 inches, it was straight enough. And then the rifles were zeroed individually with different height front sights that could be adjusted left and right. Now, the only adjustment to the front sight that was allowed was they'd set it with the gauge and they'd stamp a datum mark, was they could move it up to 0.2 millimeters left or right. And if they did that, then they'd strike out the old datum mark and strike a new one. There was no provision for different front sight heights, to my knowledge, at least it's not reported in Steve Law's book. But then they allowed a massive tolerance on both vertical and horizontal. Much, much greater tolerance on the vertical, because I mean 140 millimeters, that's quite a long way out. Let's just say that you could be quite a long way out and still pass. Now, if it didn't pass first time, oh sorry, second part of the test. So you fired your 5 shots, three of the 5 are in the box. They'd take it was a sort of semi-transparency with 120 millimeter circle on it, and the 2 most extreme shots, so the entire group had to be within 120 millimeters touching it. So if it's touching, it's in. So if you can put the 2 furthest away shots touching this 120 millimeter circle, it's good to go. And when I do the detailed video on this, I'll draw up some sort of extreme case groups of what would count as a pass. I mean, you could imagine a case of like 3 shots in a bug hole up in the top corner of the rectangle, and then the other 2 as a bug group right opposite. I mean, your mean point of impact, assuming that the mean point of impact is in the middle, can be miles and miles and miles away from the point of aim, and it still pass. And the interesting thing is, I have just got a book which I'm still going through of German rifle training, small arms training, and their view on if your rifle was unzeroed was you had to learn where to aim off. And we'll get into that in detail. If the rifle failed the test the first time, it had a do-over. If it failed the second time, it went back for rework, and then we'll go back through again, where it would get 2 attempts and a do-over. And Steve Law has, in his collection, he puts it in his book, and I'll put a picture up. An example of a rifle that failed once and passed the second time, and the group second time looks fine. I mean, it's great, but it's then knowing that it had just shot a group that was like monkey flung poop, like 10 minutes before. Because what they do is, if it failed, they let it cool off and then try it again. So yeah, it's surprisingly lax. Then we have some even more interesting stuff when we get on to talking about the Japanese contract Kar-98Ks, because not many people know that Mauser supplied a relatively small number of Kar-98Ks to Japan, Germany's ally, while Mauser were also supplying Kar-98Ks to China, who Japan was fighting at the time. This was apparently very unpopular, and Mauser were strongly discouraged from supplying China once the government found out that they were not only supplying Japan's ally, but also Japan's enemy. This was bad politics, apparently. Now, the Japanese based their acceptance around the German one, except they didn't ask for 3 out of 5 in the box. They asked for, what they'd do is they'd take the third shot from the left and draw a vertical line down, and then the third shot from the top and draw a line across, and this crossing point had to be in the box. And then they did a partial test at 300 meters. And for the partial test, so a certain percentage of the rifles they wanted to test at 300 meters, and they wanted all 5 within a box that was 40 centimeters wide by 48 centimeters high, estimated. Just as a point of reference, mentioned as objective fact and without value judgment, partial test on the number 4 rifle with the Brits wanted 6 out of 7 shots, so allowed 1 flyer into an 18 by 18 inch rectangle at 600 yards. So get your calculators out, compare and contrast that. We'll get onto that in detail when I'm feeling brave enough. So next up, Ian, not Gun Jesus Ian again. When you were talking about AR-15s not really being direct gas impingement, you mentioned having an AR-15. I think I mentioned them not having mechanical primary extraction, but anyway. I have a feeling you mentioned somewhere before something about straight pull AR-15s in the UK. Can't remember when, so can't check. What's your history with AR-15 style rifles? Do you get much use out of yours in Switzerland? And can we expect to see it feature on the channel? I was under the impression that the Swiss weren't usually very friendly towards high volume of fire run and gun types of competition, 3 guns, etc., of the type usually associated with ARs. Well, want to know more? This is my AR in one of its configurations. Now, I bought this back in Holland. In fact, what I had before was one of the Portuguese contract AR-10s that I sold to a collector in Finland, and then bought this. And in Holland, as a sports shooter, it was very difficult to get more than 5 guns, so it was quite important that a gun could do multiple things. So what I did on this one, this is a heavy barrel Oberland arms, so German produced. It's a CNC machined receiver, but it's got all the curves on it, but you won't be able to see this on the video. We'll see if the light reflects. It's all faceted because it was CNC machined and with a forward assist. What I did with this rifle was I did quite a lot of IPSC, run and gun type stuff, and also target rifle type shooting 100 meters on the very, very evil Dutch targets where the bull is a minute of angle, and they gauged everything to 8mm to supposedly make it fair, but frankly if you're shooting 308 or 8mm you deserve the extra size shot hole. So this is it basically in sort of dollar store space gun configuration. So no muzzle device on it, and then a globe front sight right out near the muzzle. Now this is an ugly beast because when I did this, I wanted a low profile gas block because I was putting a rail there. I didn't want a second rail here, and at the time, at least I couldn't find at the time, a low profile gas block that covered the whole of the gas block seat there. So I've got this short one on it. Unfortunately, it makes it ugly, but I'm totally happy with the alignment of this front block, and I don't want to have to unglue that just to replace something that's fundamentally cosmetic. Hand stop, there. So I'd shoot this with a sling, 100 meters, and I put my RPA tracker target rifle rear sight on it, and fairly easily won the club competitions with it, which was nice. For IPSC, what I'd do is I'd put a carry handle on it and a front sight on there and a really, really nasty muzzle brake. Kept the muzzle climb down, reduced the recoil, but my lord, it was noisy. And if you're up against a wall, it was a gill brake, and it deflected a lot of gas back. It was quite unpleasant, but worked very well. And what I've also got with this is a slightly customized Victor Arms old V22 rimfire upper. This one I had modified by a tame gun plumber to shoot the Dutch small bore carbine competitions at 12 meters. This nominally fits their rules marginally. Shot it standing and kneeling at 12 meters because that's what they did in Holland, so we just accepted it. So front sight block there, extended fore end because I have long arms, just fit the weight requirement. Interesting thing on this was that the extractor it came with was horrible, and I had another one made, but it's not 100% reliable. It's fun. And for a while, I had a piston 762x39 upper, which I bought from someone in Holland on the condition that if I didn't want it anymore, I'd sell it back to him or to one of his friends. So I sold it to one of his friends because it had absolutely no use in Switzerland, because it did nothing that 223 doesn't do here. I have shot that at 300 meters on a range that allowed me to shoot it, which was nice of them, and it shoots very well. I'm not involved in IPSC here because I just don't have the time at the moment. I will get back into it one day. So there is a certain amount of run and gun type stuff, but mostly the 300 meter stuff is fairly static, and this doesn't fit in the rules anywhere. The 762x39 piston upper was really, it was in my heavy experimenting with cast bullets phase, so it was a test bed for semi-auto cast bullets, and it worked very, very well indeed. I never owned a straight pull AR-15 in the UK when I lived there, and otherwise that's about it. That's my history with AR-15s. Final question. Joshua writes, can you explain why the Swiss military use their peculiar style of stripper clips as opposed to the more commonly seen Mauser style? Especially curious as I have research showing the United States Army tested Swiss style stripper clips in 1942, albeit made from paper as opposed to fiberboard and tin steel. What I think it fundamentally comes down to is that the early cartridges used paper patch bullets, and they need protecting. Because basically you don't want them to be able to rub on things like ammunition pouches before they go in the magazine, and in fact you don't want them to rub on anything at all, and that's why the magazine placement, the feed position in the magazines is extremely high, unusually high, in the 1889 right up through the 1911, because that retained the same geometry. It's only in the K31, once we were well into the Spitzer era, that that the magazine placement could be lower. But the frame type design, which incidentally the first record I found of a frame type design was Louis Dis of the Remington Arms Company, who I think he's got an 1885, 1886 patent on that type of charger for a slightly modified Remington Lee rifle. I suppose that would have been independent invention by Schmidt in Switzerland. It's about the same time as Mauser came up with his type of stripper clip, but yeah, Mauser type stripper clip with the paper patch bullets was just asking for the paper patches to be torn and then to get jams and leading and all sorts of things. I mean, if the paper rucks up, you're exposing the lead of the bullet, which is unlubricated and is then going to leave itself behind in the bore. But also, you're going to get feed issues with it. Now, in the 1908 rifle trials, which is something I'll get into in my Swiss Rifles series, they did test a Mauser type stripper clip and didn't adopt it. But all the rifles from the 1911 onwards in fact the 96/11 as well, are fitted for this Mauser type stripper clip. The K31s are as well. The stripper clips turned up again between the wars for some of the intermediate cartridge trials, but they were never adopted, and I have my own theories on why this is, because basically you've got to view the rifle, the ammunition and the equipment as a system, and so I'll demonstrate this in the video, but the existing pouches don't work well with the Mauser type stripper clips, and if you size the pouches for the Mauser type stripper clips, they wouldn't fit the frame charges. So you've got a major incompatibility issue there, and if you've got two types of ammunition, because it was all packaged in charges, you weren't issued charges and then you'd fill them. The ammunition came ready packed in charges, and if you've got two of them in the system that are incompatible, you've just got a complete nightmare on your hands. So that's, I think, why they didn't do it. So yeah, there you go. Well, that's it for this Patreon Q&A. So please, if you wish to contribute a question, please come and become a patron. Even the small amounts help very much in producing the channel. And thanks for watching, and see you again sometime. Bye.